Well, hello, everyone. I do believe we are ready to begin. Welcome once again to the OneRing.net. This is our Torn Tuesday live stream show, coming to you live via the magic of the interwebs from here in humble little Los Angeles, California, and not so humble of a show. Perhaps perhaps it's just my humble living room, but we have a big blockbuster of a show for you folks. Welcome, all of you Lord of the Rings and Hobbit and Silmarillion fans, all the fandom for J.R.R. Tolkien, coming back to us after 22 years. It's a very special show because not only is the OneRing.net celebrating a very big anniversary, but it's also the anniversary of 20 years ago this week that the very first music sessions for any of Howard Shore's music was first time recorded for a very special clip that was played at the Cannes Film Festival. And so we're here to celebrate with a lot of guests and a lot of wonderful musicians who were there at the time 20 years ago. So I will introduce myself very quickly. My name is Clifford Broadway, also known as Quick Beam, writer and contributor and host for the OneRing.net for about, oh my gosh, 22 years now. It's crazy. Behind the scenes, we have somebody behind the green curtain. Pay no attention to him. He's pulling on the levers and making things work. That is Justin, our producer and co-host. But joining me, without further ado, joining me to celebrate the very first time in human history that Howard Shore's otherworldly, outstanding music that changed our lives forever was first recorded in the sessions at Wellington Town Hall 20 years ago this week. So I bring to the show and welcome everybody who's joining us on Twitter, Instagram, Periscope, and YouTube, and on Facebook, and all the other platforms. Welcome aboard. We're going to be able to see you and hopefully have some wonderful interactions with the audience. And it's really exciting to have Jim J. Ware and Doug Adams. Doug, we've had so many shows with Doug Adams recently. Let's bring him in. Everybody knows the author of the music of the Lord of the Rings films, now in its sixth printing, being reprinted over and over again around the world. Doug Adams and his co-partner in musical crime, Jim Ware. Welcome first, gentlemen, back to our program. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I feel I'm in my natural surroundings with musicians all around. So this is the way things should be.
Yes, it is. It is. Thank you for staying up so late in your time zone, Jim. My gosh.
Is it late or is it early? I'm never quite sure.
Oh my God, your circadian rhythms. I'm going to send you a bottle of melatonin after this is all over so we can get you back to sleep on proper time, my friend. It's wonderful to have you both here, gentlemen, and also coming on board to talk with us about this music, this experience, and what it was like to be there organically in the room for the first people ever to see the marriage of sight and sound in these Middle-earth films. We bring on Erica Chalice, who is one of the original founders of the OneRing.net that started up 22 long years ago. Welcome, Erica. How are you?
Great to see everybody. Yep.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I was going to do a Gandalf line on you. No. You haven't aged a day. It's great to see you. An extraordinary musician and artist in her own right. Erica was one of the first people to help us bring the news of the world, news of the Middle-earth world, from faraway New Zealand, and working with William, and with Chris, and with Michael. The four founders created what we still have today, the OneRing.net. And all these years later, do you believe it? I don't think any of our millennials in the audience believe it, but yes, it's a website that has lasted more than 22 years. It's amazing. But also, people should know that Erica is an extremely experienced symphonic French horn player. Is that correct?
Yeah, though I have to say I didn't play. I wasn't playing in the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra, so I wasn't involved with the
Hmm.
score at all.
Oh,
But,
that's good. It was a
yeah.
good clarification. But you've played so many gigs around New Zealand, and you
Yeah.
know this world of music and the world of orchestra, how they're built, how they're maintained, how the suffering that these musicians have to go through. You know it all. Um, yeah. So it's great to have you here, Erica, and also joining us, Don, who was second concert master in the recording sessions. Don, please join us. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. Nice to see you, and I still am actually in that same role.
Oh, you are still. That's fantastic. Don,
Yeah.
tell the world your last name, because I'm terrible.
Donald Armstrong.
Yes, hello, Donald Armstrong. It's great to have you here. What a pleasure. And last but not least, playing second chair, second violin, here is David, also joining us from across the world. Welcome, David.
Hi.
To be living in a gloomy cave, David.
Oh, well, I just shut the curtain so you don't get a view of the neighbour's window, you know.
David, please remind me, good sir, your last name.
Gilling.
Welcome, David Gilling. So great to have you here. And so I have very little to add, except I'm thrilled, just completely thrilled to have all of you guests joining us. Let's go back in time, Doug Adams, if you can help us, and let's picture what this looked like. Because 20 years ago, it wasn't exactly the regular recording session that was getting, prepared this week. Everyone was all pumped up about an extra surge of work that needed to be completed for Cannes Film Festival to get this segment ready. Is that right?
Yeah, quite right. So this would have been quite early for the recording sessions for the actual release of the film, because that wasn't until the end of 2001. But it was perfect timing to get ready for the May presentation of the kind of show reel, preview reel that they had for the Cannes Film Festival. So that was the point at which Howard had been composing for a little while. He had sort of the central part of Fellowship done, the whole Mines of Moria sequence, and a little clip of some of the endings, some of the breaking of the Fellowship music. And so the New Zealand Symphony was contracted, and at Wellington Town Hall played the very first notes of the Howard Shore's Lord of the Rings music. Cliff, you were commenting before that these would have been some of the very first eyes to see any of the completed film, but I guess more importantly to me, they were the first ears to hear any of the completed score. So, and creating it at the time, which is kind of
that is the most interesting part about this. We're talking about a rare intersection of place and time, where these people, these wonderful musicians, were the first people to be there and get closest to hearing the music and seeing the film the way it would ultimately be. And that is thrilling. Now, also, I'm hearing that somebody has some very good stories about David. You have some good stories about your seat where you were seeing this on the screen for the first time?
Well, it was more that having been a Lord of the Rings reader since an early teenager, I wanted to know what this was going to look like, because, everybody had their own picture in their heads. And Peter Jackson is sort of round about my age. I was born in 1962. So I was just really curious to know what his vision of it was. And I can't remember which bit we recorded first, but it might have been the lead up to the Chamber of Mazabul, or whatever you call it, where Gimli runs in.
Mm-hmm.
I seem to remember it was that. But my first reaction on seeing these things was, wow, this guy, he's onto something. There was the lighting. Whether or not that's what I had in my head, that was like, yep, this is it. But but also it was the extraordinary attention to detail, not just the music itself, but everything about it, the way the microphones were set up, the venue that they'd chosen, because the Wellington Town Hall has a fantastic acoustic, and the way everything was set up, it was to let the acoustic do the job and not have to mess about with it with microphones. Now that's quite amazing when you consider this is a movie.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, my first impression was that we really are here, because we'd heard about it, we'd heard about this big blockbuster, but we didn't really know what was going to happen. And just the scale of it was fantastic.
It is worth noting that at that point, people were nervous. I want our fans to know that we had no proof yet in the pudding that Peter was going to pull this magic rabbit out of his hat. We really, really had no idea. People who are film critics could sit back and say, oh, Heavenly Creatures was such an awesome, elegant, and understated way to introduce fantasy elements into a crime drama. And they could wax poetic forever about that. But still, the audiences had no idea how a little New Zealand director, with these resources that he had scraped together in New Zealand, all kept under secret by New Line Cinema. We really had no idea. So you guys were the first. You were the first, you musicians. And I'm envious, so envious that you got to see it all come together that first time. It's very exciting.
I should also point out that it wasn't quite all there yet. I seem to remember that as they're running down to the bridge, those bits and pieces falling, that was still CGI. Just the outline and the troll as well. That hadn't been completed either. So it would be going through these bits that were completed, and then suddenly this computer mock-up that was done so they could get the music recorded. So we didn't actually see all of it.
Oh yeah, but just those beginning parts, and I mean that was just the not the beginning parts, but just the Moria sequence. But how excited were you after realizing maybe you were an hour into it? How excited did your energy change? Don, you can chime in too as well. Were you there together?
Yeah, sure. Well, I was actually directly opposite David, and I was also right next to the screen, but could only see it on the playback. So, we would record something, and then they would go and play it back, and it would replay the video. So I'd sneak there and have a little look, and I was amazed because I don't know anything about movies, and I certainly didn't then. But I was expecting to see the video, and all I saw was like a staircase, nothing above or below the stairs, just like a line like that, and some tiny little men running up it. And that was the movie, because they hadn't got to put anything else in. So you had to let your imagination run and trust, well, I suppose they're going to do this later. I was sort of amazed how kind of unfinished it looked. But really that time was amazing in New Zealand, because, we had heard some story that Peter Jackson had made a 10-minute version of it's probably history now, but, we had heard this sort of buzz, and he'd got this 3-movie contract, and the whole of New Zealand was sort of being turned upside down with people arriving, and fancy Californian guys from Hollywood that we were just in awe of, and very smooth talking people, and heaps of them, and so there was an excitement just throughout New Zealand about this huge project, and New Zealand's always been a kind of a country to attract tourists, so there was this enormous thing about, this might make tourism, and filming the beautiful scenery in New Zealand and everything. And it was one of the early movies that really used that sort of New Zealand scenery. So then it was a huge coup for the NZSO to be hired, to record this music. And it was kind of like a hope was there that we might get more of the Ring, films, which we did later on. So we go in with huge excitement, and we come in, there's security guards all over the place, technicians galore, everybody, places sealed off that we couldn't go to, that was all the recording stuff. Normally we'd just walk in and out, no problem. And that was just this great big deal. So Howard Shaw comes out, and we're all ready to record, and he says, well, look, let me tell you about the movie, just relax. So it was hard to relax because we were all so excited. And he spent 20 minutes telling us all about the story. And I mean, if anyone's been in a recording studio, time is money. He had more than 100 people sitting there.
Yeah.
God knows what that 20 minutes would cost,
Of course. Yeah.
And he just talked away like there was no problem, And then little later, he actually got involved with the technical side, which I don't know if people were too happy about that. But he said maybe the microphones need to go down a bit. Is it something like that? And then this army of technicians. Normally we got one guy comes out, so we had like 15 people came out, and we're musicians. We were really impressed, and of course we were all on best behaviour, and we really did our best. And
well, was that the first time? Actually, was that the first time the New Zealand Symphony had been commissioned to do film score?
Oh, we've done small ones, but not really commercial type. Oh, we've done one or two from. One or two people in California had sort of heard about the orchestra, but it was few and far between. And then there was incredible things happened there that you just wouldn't really imagine. Like this choir showed up because it was all about Moria, and they wanted these. You probably can tell me what these animals were or the beasts were, but this choir of basically mostly Samoan guys showed up. And they all were along the top there in a big long line, and they had to kind of do this grunting noise, like. And I heard about the choir director is a Samoan guy called Ingelesi Iti, and he was asked to come and find a choir, and it was such last minute and so quick. Apparently, he was ringing everyone he knew who could sing, saying, "Can you sing the LOD?" And they'd go like, "Right, you're in," And, and these guys, their warm up was they're all in a row. Their warm up was to turn sideways and massage the next guy's shoulders, and then go the other way and do this. Like completely different from the normal choir warm up, where they were singing their scales and things. So many cool things happened there.
That's so exciting.
Yeah.
But that thing about the money and Howard starting off with that introduction. At the end of the day, he hadn't quite completed what he wanted to do, so he just, for the chair of the players committee, can we just do quarter of an hour's overtime? I mean, it's like, with any other sessions we had done, if we'd been in that position, it would have been, right, we're really into it, we've got to finish, bang. But this just, can we have the overtime? It was, wow.
Yeah, I have a quick statistic covering the scale of these sessions. So not just the New Zealand sessions, but the London ones as well. So the entire score is about 3 hours of music. It was recorded over 60 3-hour recording sessions, which means that for every minute of music, there was 1 hour of session time on average, which is a huge amount of time and a huge amount of money for any film score. Just
to give a relative to that, I did a film score once where a string quartet went in for an hour. We played a chord, we played just a few little melodies. And then from that, they used that to make an entire movie. 1 hour with 4 people. And that was what their budget could extend to. So, you go from one extreme to the other. But it was wonderful to see this, that like there was no limit to trying to get to perfection. And you could see that went right through every aspect of the movie.
Indeed.
It just again and again, and more people, more days, whatever was needed.
And also, one thing that was quite striking too was the way they tried to achieve a particular effect without electronic intervention. I mean, if an arrow was supposed to go with going into somebody was supposed to go with a particular drum strike, they'd keep doing the drum strike until it was absolutely lined up, rather than just saying, oh, bugger it, that button, bang. It was... So I also think that might not seem like much, but when you put it over the 9 hours of movies or whatever, there's this sort of, I don't know, thread of humanity that runs through that sort of thing, which I think is one of the reasons why these movies resonate so much. When they were made, that's how they were made. And yes, there's technological intervention, but so much of it was actually around like that relationship between the acting and the music to try and actually achieve it rather than do it technologically.
Yeah, and these just beautiful, beautiful melodies of Howard Shore. I mean, he did take an enormous amount of time and things would go over, but the tunes themselves, they're just absolutely wonderful, you know. And it's like Joseph Haydn said, the composer said, you know, music is melody, you know, a really great composer, it's melody. And Howard Shore's just got that, you know, those beautiful, iconic melodies that everyone knows now. And the scoring, you know, that huge expanse that he creates orchestrally, you know, just fantastic.
But one thing I appreciated straight up about the score was, you know, there's Wagner and The Ring. Well, this was Tolkien and The Ring, and this approach of using the leitmotif. It really, when you've got a story that's as complicated as Lord of the Rings, it seems obvious to us now to do that, but to attach a particular motif to a particular character, or, well, yeah, the Ring's a character itself. So, you know, there's always that da 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 da, da that thing. Every time the Ring shows up, that's in there somewhere. So whether you know it or not, you're absorbing the connection. And I thought that was a brilliant way of approaching it. It's not necessary. If you think about it from just reading the book, that's not necessarily obvious. It is now to us. But I think that may actually be a bit of a game changer in terms of writing music scores.
Indeed.
Maybe Korngold used to do that, but yeah, I think that Howard Shore really brought that back in, along with John Williams and so forth. But he did it in these movies,
and did it in such a spectacular way that it has been, you know, the talk of the community for 20 years, and we're still talking about it. We're still captivated by Mr. Shore's very intelligent and very thoughtful approach to trying to bring music into the themes and the characters of Tolkien, when we all know that Tolkien's work is vast and complex. And I just don't envy any person as a composer who would have to walk into that and be charged with that task. Let me ask, was the New Zealand Concert Orchestra always supposed to record this music, or was this just a surprise request? Erica, do you remember how it came around to this?
No, I wasn't. No, I wasn't.
You weren't there?
No, I wasn't part of those discussions.
Ah, okay. You probably heard about it from other friends, though, because
yeah, but I was living in Auckland at that time, so I didn't have such easy access to sort of music gossip from Wellington. Although we're fairly, you know, the orchestras are fairly tightly connected, and just the degree of secrecy with which everything happened. And also, you get a lot of rumors, and you didn't know which ones were true. You know, there are a lot of hopeful things. Oh, we might be doing this. We might be doing that. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I think our orchestra tried to pitch to do some playing, but we didn't get it. I was in the Auckland Philharmonia at the time.
Ah, yes, of course.
Tried to pitch for that
now,
work, but of course we didn't get it.
Here's something. I'm sorry that you guys didn't get it in the Symphonia. But I mean, I would have thought that you would have been pulled into it at some point.
We weren't there yet.
But let's take a look further back. We're 20 years away from this now. Nobody's going to get in trouble if you admit this. If anybody wants to admit this now on our show, I would be very happy. All right, it's confessional time. Did anybody anywhere pass some sheet music around from one musician to another discreetly and say, look at this, look at what Howard wrote for the Lord of the Rings? Now everybody knows that New Line Cinema was trying to keep images from leaking, but I'm interested in the music. Was any of the music leaking among the musicians, or does that even happen?
It was put on our stand, and we were sight reading. That's one of the reasons why, you know, an hour per minute of music. Well, if you're sight reading, things aren't necessarily going to go perfectly straight up. And that's how they got around the secrecy thing. It was put out at the last second.
Ah,
We would arrive for a session and a new lot of music would be on the stand.
so you didn't get days and days of rehearsal with the music at all?
No.
Oh my
Show up and
gosh.
play.
And I think the other thing,
How?
the other thing is, even if
That's standard. That's absolutely standard.
yeah. We don't, in the orchestral world, you practice in order to be able to play anything that's put in front of you. You don't spend weeks practicing a symphony. You practice so that when you get there, you'll be able to play.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you walk into the room and someone says, this is Gustav Holst, The Planets, or you walk in the next day and the job is Rimsky-Korsakov, the Russian Easter Overture, you're going to be okay with that because you've practiced those things prior to the session. Okay.
Yeah. But what I was going to say, if somebody had been able to share, hey, this is my violin, my violin line, it still wouldn't give anyone a picture of what the whole thing sounds like. I mean, the reason we use orchestras so often for films is that it's just such a immense and subtle, powerful instrument taken as a whole, and you can't really take one part out of it and say, oh, there's a bit where a guy hits an anvil with a hammer and it's amazing. I mean, it doesn't paint a picture of how that musical moment is going to sound and how it's going to affect your emotions. Here's this tune, it goes like this, and it's like it doesn't give you the picture at all. You have to hear
an example of that is that Howard Shore uses the thing he calls the manifesto a lot.
Oh, what's that?
Now, it's this square with instructions in it. Now, it just looks like meaningless hieroglyphics until he stands up there and says, I want this here, this here, this here, this here. And it's always done with this building thing. And he uses this a lot. And over the course of the manifesto, going bang, 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 bang throughout a number of instruments, the entire musical picture that he's after emerges. But if you just see that on the page, it's like, okay, what does this mean?
So they're not musical symbols. It's just like a pattern of here it rises and here.
Yeah, it is kind of. We call it aleatoric. It looks like Penderecki kind of thing. But
it's interesting.
This is how. Particularly, a lot of the chasing sequences are done. It's not cops and robbers stuff. He gets his manifesto, and it seems to me, others know more about this than I do, but that it's building towards a certain point in the action. Yeah.
But you've got a visual representation of that.
Of what we're supposed to do.
Yeah, sometimes it's done in the scoring too, but like there might be an instruction saying choose any high note and play a tremolo, like that. So all the violins would choose their own notes, so you hear a cluster of notes, and then somebody else, they might at the same time they might have someone else doing little pizzicato, and so it got to a point with when we did the Hobbit movies. Conrad Pope was this wonderful conductor
That's right. It was Mr. Conrad Pope who replaced Howard Shore in conducting. Yes.
Yeah, and he in the end we did it so often. He'd turn to the first violin and say, "Can you just do your magic there?" Another section worrying who did what and everything, but it was like, magic. Yeah, we know what to do. Just play magic.
And while you're talking about Conrad Pope, for one of your OneRing.net shows, you've got to get him to come on and tell us Buddy Rich joke.
Oh yes.
He managed to bookend it was the first, the second Hobbit movie that we did, The Desolation. Mm-hmm. He managed to bookend the whole group of sessions with this bloody Buddy Rich joke. It's just, anyway, I won't steal his thunder, but, you could have your whole show and
okay, we'll do that. You know what, my friend, I will, by all means, I will challenge Mr. Pope to throw down his famous joke. I'll be more than glad to do that. This is very exciting. But now, now that I've got everyone here, and I want to say thank you, Doug Adams, I think, was the first person who taught me the meaning of that term, aleatoric music. Am I saying it right?
Aleatoric, yeah.
I'm saying it right, barely. But really, when they put that sheet music in front of you, Don or David, did any of it survive? Did anybody sneak a piece of sheet music home with them? I'm just curious, because it's the type of thing that, I would do with my little Fagans on my fingers. I'd be very much like a Dickens character, sneaking little pieces of sheet music everywhere. I'm sorry, I admit it, but
Yeah, it's funny because we probably didn't treasure the music. We showed up. It was the whole thing about this is such an important, obviously important movie, and it's so incredible to be part of it and all this sort of thing. But I don't think anyone was like, wow, this theme is going to be, so iconic. It was like, there'll be some music. We didn't know that it was going to be what it sort of became to be. So I didn't hear anyone sort of saying, oh, should we sneak it out? Or, we weren't treasuring it in that way. And the music was whipped off the next day. It all changed. They did there was a few little changes made in the music. It was emailed back to LA, I think, and then someone overnight rewrote the parts and sent them back again. So it was changing all the time. Yeah, new music.
I think the studio generally accounts for all the sheet music after the sessions anyway, so it's probably best that nobody tried to make.
Well, I'm just, I've never seen any sheet music show up on eBay 20 years later, so I imagine that never happened. Well, I mean, I have to say the impression that must have come up upon you all who were there in those early recording sessions, did the impression come upon you very, very early that you were onto something, that you've already addressed this a bit, David, but at what point did you think, oh, wow, I can't wait to keep doing this. I can't wait to do the next movie and the next movie, because, you realized you were onto something really genius.
Well, I actually realized that a little bit early because my wife is a violin teacher and she had this little guy she was teaching the violin to, and we got to know his parents. And it turned out that they were actually the people who came up with the fabric that were used in the fellowship cloaks, the alpaca, the llama wool, the eldridges out at Stansborough Farm. Anyway, little Jamie, the young boy, was my wife's fiddle student, and I hearing them talk, oh, mum and dad are doing this. I thought, wow, everybody's involved. It didn't matter where you went, somebody knew somebody or was actually doing something. And my son rides for Special Olympics, and the first coach he had there was involved with wrangling the horses for the ride of the Rotheram down the track. Everywhere you moved, somebody was doing something. But I've got to show everybody a bit of a treasure off one of the studio techs, one of the microphone boxes. Can you see what's on there?
Oh,
yeah,
that looks like Andy Serkis's autograph.
It is. And when he came back to do King Kong, the broadcasting people were there, and he signed their microphone box for them. I couldn't resist a snap of that. There was no agreement covering microphone boxes.
Right.
Yeah, but it absolutely was everywhere. This thing, like our house we actually lived just above Peter Jackson's house, and my partner used to say, "Oh, we look down on Peter Jackson." And Richard Taylor, I think his son went to the local school, and there was a fundraising, fair day, and you could get your picture taken next to his Oscar for $5. And it was, I used to ride my bike past Peter Jackson's house, and he had his Oscar up on the kitchen window. You can just see it right there. So everything was, and so many people, especially in Miramar, which is where I live, Weta Digital is, or Weta Studios and Park Road Postal, and it's just down the road. And all the cafes full of people from those places, and yeah.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the nerves, maybe on the national stage. Maybe Erica, you could speak to this. What were the nerves of most Kiwis like at the time? I mean, were people actually thinking, oh my gosh, is Peter going to pull this off?
They thought,
And
oh, it'll probably do quite well for a New Zealand film.
for a New Zealand film. Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And this was one of the things that made it hard as a reporter trying to find information about it, is that people were so blasé. You know, they'd say, oh, yeah, there's some people doing some filming down the end of our street, you know, and it's just because it was a New Zealand movie, people just didn't really get excited about it in the way that you would expect, because it just wasn't sinking in what it might possibly be. But and yet on the other hand, people couldn't help noticing that everybody knew somebody that was involved in some way. So somehow those two things, nobody ever really added them up. Wow, one, this is really huge, everyone's involved. But two, it's a New Zealand movie, so it's probably, it'll probably do quite well for a New Zealand movie.
Okay. Now, comparatively speaking, did that energy change after the Cannes footage was released and after the entire world started exploding?
Certainly after the entire thing was released. People were excited after the reaction to the Cannes footage, But even so, I don't think people really got it. Yeah.
They really didn't get it until after the release, after the worldwide release, and then wow, okay.
And New Zealand does travel a lot, so for everyone, I mean, because it's a small country, people do go overseas a lot, relatively speaking. And the difference between traveling overseas before the films came out, where you could say you were from New Zealand and people would wonder if that was in the Netherlands, or they might guess it was near Australia, or it could be, they didn't know a single thing about New Zealand, not one.
Off the coast of Japan is a frequent one.
Yeah. I remember people saying, "Oh, it's in the South Pacific. I mean, is Middle Earth going to have palm trees or something?" So
or people were alternately saying, "Are you going to make the Lord of the Rings look like Xena and Hercules?"
Yeah, it was Xena or maybe palm trees, or sheep. So in New Zealand just flew so far below the radar that nobody had, especially non-English speaking countries, people just had no picture of New Zealand whatsoever. And then afterwards, everybody knew where New Zealand was, what it looked like, what the people were like. It was a complete change. And because we travel so much, everyone was coming back from overseas saying, wow, everyone knows where we are now. Everyone knows who we are, and they didn't used to. Yeah.
So Don and David, it's kind of fair to say that you didn't realize you were part of history, like a major part of history at the time when you were recording. You didn't even know it.
Oh no, well, for me, my memories may be different, but maybe I'm remembering from later. But I just remember this huge buzz of like, this is something big is really going on here, And I don't remember ever having anything else but the knowledge that this was going to be huge. I mean, it's such a huge story. It's 3 movies all done at once, and the whole town was sort of. I mean, even though there was so much going on in the area. Like I'd be going to work and I'd see a huge truck go past with an arm on it, but the arm took up the entire truck, and you're like, "What's going on? Is this King Kong, or is this another bit of Lord of the Rings, or what?" You always got this sense, and there was this wonderful thing at the cafe down the road that people said Sean Connery had been in town. And this was before Lord of the Rings, I think, and they thought he might be in it. And it was the local cafe that wasn't even really trendy outside the suburb. It became very trendy. Chocolate Fish Cafe. Yeah. Chocolate Fish is a little New Zealand icon. And anyway, so the owners of the cafe bought this cardboard cutout of Sean Connery, and they put it outside the cafe.
Oh no, that was a subject that we as the fans talked about for a long time, because we knew that Sean Connery was in the casting loop for Gandalf.
Okay.
We knew that for a while, but that it's still an amazing story that Mr. Connery famously said, "I don't understand this material. I don't want to do this," and he walked away from the role of Gandalf.
Well, someone who did understand that material, obviously, was Christopher Lee.
Mm-hmm.
And Erica, you'll remember him, a conductor who came to New Zealand quite frequently, Jim Sedaris, was staying at what was it, the Park Royal Intercontinental, whichever hotel it was, and he saw Christopher Lee in there having breakfast, and Jim being Jim, he went up and asked if he could join him. And so sits down there, and luckily Jim had the brains not to start banging on about Hammer House of Horror, and he'd remembered that, well, Christopher Lee, a very fine bass baritone voice, and that he'd done some singing, and so he was quizzing him about that. And you know, New Zealand was a place where that sort of thing started happening, whereas anywhere else on the planet, there's no way. People started to become a fabric of the society here. I mean, you've heard all the stories about the fountain on Cuba Street and tattoos and various bits and bobs. So
we would get sent things sometimes of people's the actors or whatever indiscretions, and we'd be like, no, we're not. If the Daily Mail or whatever wants to publish stuff like that, they can. But the One Ring didn't really want to go there. So
also we got quite not protective necessarily, but
we were protective. Yeah.
What's the big deal? They're here to make a movie.
Yeah.
And what they do offset, well, look, we're in a touring orchestra, so all sorts of stuff happens in touring orchestras, and it's just like that's what happens. So you just shut up about it. There's no big deal.
Oh, what happens in the orchestra stays in the orchestra.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
But also, it's a bit like that with the whole country. Like, if we see a celebrity, like in general in the public, Kiwis don't really kind of go, "Whoa, my God, it's so-and-so, let's go and get their autograph." We'll just quietly mumble to our friend, "Oh, is that Jacinda Ardern? Is that so and so?" But we might not necessarily go up. We'll just leave them alone to have their lunch. And
nice.
I would say that's quite appreciated.
Well, one example of that was during these sessions that we're talking about was the actors hadn't seen any of this stuff either. So some of them were showing up in the green room to see what was going on this massive big screen that they had out there. And Orlando Bloom at that stage, I think he was straight out of college, so he was still chatting to people, but I saw this not elderly fellow in the corner, and I realised it was Ian Holm, but I just left him to it because, this is great Shakespearean actor here.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't go out, "Oh, Mr. Holm, can I have your autograph, please?" There was none of that.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that Ian Holm and Orlando and some of those top tier talent actually came into the sessions. I didn't know that.
Well,
that's great.
They didn't come into where the orchestra was recording, but the backstage area where there was the mixing equipment and all that sort of stuff. And the ones I remember were Viggo Mortensen, Orlando Bloom, and Ian Holm. There may well have been others, but of course they didn't know what Peter Jackson's vision for this was either. So they were just as serious as we were. They'd had to wear these prosthetic feet and God knows what else. I mean, John Rhys Davies in particular must have wondered what the hell was going to come out given what he had to do. So
yeah. Poor John Rhys Davies suffered from some reactions with the latex, with the makeup that he had for his character.
I'm not surprised.
It was difficult for him. Doug, is there anything that you're dying to ask these musicians since we're all here together?
I just wonder, I get the question a lot from fans who are curious about the technical aspect of playing with a click track and how that affects musicians. And I always give my example, but I'm sure they'd much rather hear from the actual performers. With so much sort of this, long horizontal lyrical type of writing, to have that tick, tick, tick in your ear, is that something that you feel is, obviously it's a help for synchronizing and keeping the tempo locked and all that, but is it sort of a hindrance in terms of trying to express some of these longer lines and things like that?
See, this is quite interesting because you do use a click track a lot with movie recording, and often it will be that the rhythm section have put their bit down, and then they'll bring in the brass, they do their thing, and then strings will come in later and put out kind of like, cream on the top, but we don't actually see all the other instruments. And actually, for the Lord of the Rings, and it's not because it was earlier, it's because it was happening like that way back then. We met as an entire big orchestra with even the percussion, who can often sort of leak their sound into the other ones. We had the entire orchestra all there, and every take was done as an entire orchestra. So we did have the click track, but it wasn't like the music was layered up. There was only one or two things would have been added on later, like the folk violin, or the folk, what is it, the little...
Yeah, the Hardanger fiddle.
Yeah. Couple of things like that. And then, of course, if there's any choral stuff, that would tend to be layered later. But, even those grunting Samoan Moria choir, they did that along with us. So I think that gives it a real orchestral, complete sound to it.
I think that was very important. Howard, he wanted a performance, not just a sort of studio performance. He wanted to, and that's probably why the New Zealand Symphony was involved. Is he wanted seasoned performers. He didn't just want,
like a session,
a bunch of studio guys laid down. He wanted something very authentic.
Yeah, and of course, Peter Jackson was very keen to have the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra for two reasons. One is that he's built a lot of things in this country, and it was a enormous vote of support for the orchestra. But also, the director has to be there for all of those 60 days or whatever it's going to be, and he only needed to go down the road rather than going all the way to the other end of the world. So there was good reasons to do it in New Zealand. It also a fantastic benefit of this was that at certain times in the past, people have wanted to demolish our Wellington Town Hall. And people say acoustics, who cares? It's not good for spoken word, and often it might be used for that. It's been used for boxing and everything, and so there's been a lobby. And anyway, so these top movie engineers who are doing the top movies in the world came here and were absolutely raving about the Wellington Town Hall and the beautiful acoustic, and Peter Jackson, he met with us all near the end, and everyone crowded around it. There was no there was no sitting back there, and everyone wanted to talk. And he said, "Look, I'm really going to do what I can to make this town hall into a recording studio. Like a really good, so we can really record, because you have a lot of like siren noise and things comes in." And now there's a big renovation going on of the town hall. It's going to become the home of the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra, and it's going to be have proper modern recording facilities and everything. So that's precipitated a fantastic heritage building.
But also, Peter Cobbin, when he was recording the Hobbit material, the Abbey Road guy, he took detailed measurements of the Wellington Town Hall so that when these renovations were done, they've actually got these measurements that they can line it up with, so that the acoustic that Peter Jackson so treasures is preserved, because it would be very easy to screw it up.
A bit of a mystery.
Indeed.
Yeah. Hall acoustics are a bit of a mystery. They're not easily reproduced, that's for sure,
Well, I think this is also one of the reasons why they wanted to do complete takes, because as musicians know, when you're in a concert hall, it can sound very different once the audience is in there. So taking people out and just doing particular sections means that the acoustic is going to change, and that they might have to compensate with the knobs and dials and stuff. So it was easier just to have us all there, and so that's what the acoustic was. I think that was probably a key reason for that.
Every place they recorded after Wellington, they were trying to create that acoustic. When they did it in Watford, when they did it in they were trying to recreate what the town hall in Wellington had been.
Wow.
So really laid down the sound for everything.
Indeed. Now, here's perhaps a layman's question, a more mundane question, but in your opinion, in your very informed opinion, who had the toughest part to play out of the musicians? Was it the woodwinds? Was it the percussionists? Was it the violinists? Who really had some of the toughest stretches of music, just from pure challenge, technical challenge standpoint, from what Mr. Shore had written? I'm curious because I've never been able to ask one of you musicians this very thing.
Okay, you've got a brass player and 2 string players.
Yeah. Look, given the way he was always asking for the taiko, it's probably the taiko player, you know, the percussionists.
Yeah.
He was the kitchen he had has up the back.
Uh-huh.
It suggests to me that, and also interestingly enough, you know, Mirkwood flicking forward to the Hobbit, Mirkwood, instead of having the special effects team, session after session was set aside so that the percussion section could do it. They had all these toys, and Conrad Pope was like a kid in a candy shop. So they were, and they were linking up with Howard Shaw, and they were sorting out all these things they could do with the actual instruments rather than having to resort to special effects. So it may well be the percussionists.
They have logistical issues too, because they might have to move from one instrument to another, which is physically distanced, you know, while keeping the count going in their head. It's like, oh yeah, I've got 3 bars to get from the, you know, from the marimba to the, you know, drum over there, you know. Yeah.
That's crazy. How can someone do that?
I don't know.
Well,
we never turn around to look. It just sort of happens like behind us. Yeah.
Our principal percussion is a genius. I mean, he's either a very fast runner or an octopus, because he manages to pull this off.
Wow.
They do these big logistic charts of where the music stands are going to go with which music, so you've got the right instruments, you know, because you've got to be reading the right instrument. Oh, this music scan's going to have the triangle and the tambourine and this other thing, but we need another copy over there for when you run over to hit the marimba, or when you play the marimba. So they
spend hours preparing
even before they play a single note. They do all this logistics planning. Yeah.
For me, I mean, I would agree with David that the percussion were kind of the most busy and challenged with just the you know, incredible endurance and so many different things that they had to do. In terms of the rest of the orchestra, you know, this movie has huge parts for the French horn section, and the horns meaning just the French horn, not like trumpets, trombone. And that, you know, they had these great big long lines, and it really had to be, you know, not just good but beautiful. And I think you all hear that in some of the playing, just absolutely beautiful long. And you just needed horn players that could play beautifully. And these solo instruments, I mean, you know, they might not be hard notes, but like I said to my colleague Vesa, who's the concert master, and so when you only one solo violin, he would be the one that plays that. And in one of the Hobbit movies, he played a solo, and, you know, you only get like 1 or 2 takes, even though there's a lot of time, you know, because they got to get this right and the sound right and all these things. They go, right, let's do it. Maybe a couple of times you get to play it. And he played something, you know, really beautifully. You can feel the tension. You can just feel it. My God, you know, this has to be really good. And straight after it, I just turned to him and I said, you know, probably 100 million people are going to listen to that. Was something I would say afterwards, but I would never say that before. But, you know, you could just feel that, whoa, you know.
The thing for the horns is they've got these sort of standout moments when they've, you know, got to sound beautiful and they're, you know, to the fore. But they also have a lot of time when they're just sitting there holding a chord, which is very easy to do if you're playing a keyboard. You just hold the chord. But for the horns, it's like a physical effort. And during the live, you know, they did that live performance, sort of Lord of the Rings symphony in the town hall. And I remember looking down to I was sitting nearby in the gallery, whatever. I looked down at one of the horn players and she sort of caught my eye and very slowly crossed her eyes and uncrossed them. Because, you know, they'd been holding the same so they'd been holding the same notes or just shifting slightly for like minutes at a time. And it's
oh, that must be insane to try to find your breath interval when you're holding those notes for a long time.
It's not. But you're never going to run out of air. You can just keep breathing. You know, you just breathe.
Yeah.
And, But it's actually holding the note and holding the note. It's kind of like you're holding a weight that just gets heavier and heavier and heavier.
Oh my gosh!
It was flawless. They'd do that exhausting stuff, and then they'd, you know, break out and play a melody, and it would be beautiful and sound effortless. But I knew how much work they were doing.
But something with movie recording that's quite interesting is that it goes from like extremely boring to incredibly high pressured, and like because
mm.
you might be doing a take and you're not even in it, so you sit there for half an hour not playing a word, not playing a note,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden you've got to do something. And we'd played a whole day of just all those wind players were just playing long notes, and pretty sort of tedious, really. And then at the last half an hour, he said, "Oh, let's just do this bit with a lower brass." And it was like lower brass isn't 3 trombones and a tuba like a normal symphony orchestra. There was like 7 trombones, and about 4 of them were bass trombones and 2 tubas. Howard Shaw really beefed up the lower end of the orchestra, and they had to play this like really tricky rhythmic, like, and he'd go, "Yeah, that's good. Let's just do it again." And these guys were absolutely put up through their paces in the last half an hour of a long day, where they'd been basically sitting there the whole day. And you got to, you like, that's it, you got to do it.
Wild.
Not necessarily difficult, but the strings certainly had a lot of divisies to sort out before recording as well. So Howard likes to write those, big 7 and 8 and 12 note chords sometimes. So
and that was quite interesting. Yeah, that was quite interesting how we worked that out too, because the first violins weekend, there's so many of us, we just said, "Oh, just pick a part, we'll be fine." And I remember that the viola guys, they had a few picky people there, and they were, "Oh, which part do I play? And they would be busy working it all out. So we're like, "Yep, it'll be fine."
This is great. Okay.
Whereas in the second fiddles, we have this unwritten rule: odds by play, evens by player, odds by desk, which means it's divided into 2 parts, 4 parts, 6 parts. It's by player. But if it's odd numbers of lines, like 3, 5, that sort of thing, it's by stand.
Can you send me back?
If the conductor wants something different, they can ask for it. Otherwise,
Can you send me that? Because I'm a music librarian, and sometimes the violins are asking me, "How are we splitting this?" And I'm like, "I don't know."
Yeah, well, exactly. This is the thing that can be. You can waste enormous amounts of time on that in rehearsals if you're not careful.
Yep.
Indeed. Now, here's something that we might consider as we come to the closing of our show, because unfortunately, all good things must come to an end, and this is too extraordinary of a time. I don't want to let it end. But let's consider: have any of you performed this music recently? And tell me, does it mean something more personal to you now, with this perspective of time?
Well, the wonderful thing we did was actually just a couple of years afterwards, after the movies had come out, and it was already very famous. And we did the Lord of the Rings Symphony, and Howard Shaw came back here and he conducted it in a live concert. And
that must have been a highlight. That must have been such a great thing.
Well, it was around the release of the 3rd movie, the red carpet moments and all of that. That was part of the festivities.
It was incredible, because all of a sudden, after having everything been behind the scenes and no one really knowing what goes on, it was a public kind of show. And the whole symphony, it was beautiful. It was beautifully put together. And Howard Shaw, I remember him being incredibly nervous, because he's never out on the stage. He's always in a production place. And he did, he was great. He conducted really well, but I know it was quite a big deal for him. And the wonderful thing that I think what was lovely about that concert was that it was a public concert, and the hall was absolutely full of people. And Peter Jackson came along to the concert, and they had a seat for him right at the front in the circle and everything. And he came out and just had to walk over past a few people, and people started clapping when he walked in, and he sort of just waved slightly and sat down, kind of what I'd say is Kiwi style. Yep, hi, And anyway, people stood up, and then they kept on clapping, and kept on clapping. And it was like this wonderful public recognition of what he had done, And then what he did was just classic too, because he decided to stand up and do the Hollywood greeting, and he stood up and he went like this, and to the crowd, and he did this, you're all my lovely people and all that, and it was a complete piss take of the Hollywood entrance. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just perfect for New Zealand. And it was just so funny and so wonderful all at the same time. And then, we all played our hearts out, and it was a great evening.
Yeah, Howard had some. I've got to put a plug in because Howard had some help from a very experienced Hollywood conductor, John Mocherry, there, and John was helping Howard all the way through that because, as Don said, he was used to conducting sessions, where you can do a take and then you sit down, and then you do a take and you sit down. This was about an hour's worth of music constantly going. And this is where he realized that he'd actually written some pretty complicated rhythmic stuff because, you just think of the Isengard thing, the stuff. Yeah. Well, the various iterations of it, having to switch between them and then back into other things. It was actually pretty complicated once you put it all together. So
wow.
John was there showing him this is how you practically make the switch, because it's the transitions that are tough. That's where things can really come apart. Once things are going and people are playing their melodies, you can kind of wave your hands, but the transitions, you have to nail them. And so yeah, it was really interesting seeing the transformation from a movie score into a symphony.
Fascinating. That is absolutely fascinating. Jim, Doug, you guys?
This has been fantastic to hear these stories. I mean, I've been working around this stuff for almost the entire 20-year interim here, but you still have more stories than I've heard. So this is a complete pleasure. It's fantastic to view it.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that we're still finding out new little nuggets of information 20 years down the line. It's fascinating.
I imagine there would be no hesitation from anyone if they said, come join us, for maybe a smaller chamber setup or for some other event. Would you hesitate to play some of Howard's music? You guys, any of you?
Yeah, we could do that. We just have to get our hands on it.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, no, you don't have it memorized? You don't have the Lord of the Rings score fully memorized by now? Come on.
Erica does. She could play the whole thing, probably.
Yeah. We went through a stage of driving around with it always playing in the car, but not recently. Yeah.
Oh.
I may be guilty of having jumped ships.
Oh dear. Oh.
A little bit there.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Well, in my opinion, I suppose the surprise is that you're part of history and you don't realize it. You're in the middle of history and you do not know it. Most of the individuals who are caught up in the biggest moments of history that we all want to look back on, they really don't know organically at the time that they're in such a pivotal moment. It's kind of funny like that.
That's what Sam says at the end of the Two Towers, remember?
Yes.
Start the moment with the what's it? And he saves Frodo.
Yes.
Yeah.
About the stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you've got back up from the source.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any last thoughts, David or Don or Erica, that you would like to share before we go about your impressions of Howard's work and how he musically brought Middle Earth to life?
Well, I was just so grateful that he was using an orchestra.
Yeah.
This, and not just an orchestra, he was using the full whack. So this to me was harking back to the glory days with Korngold and Steiner and all those fellas. So I was just so incredibly grateful that he was doing that. He could have gone in all sorts of directions.
Yeah, just an epic achievement, in every way. And I just love how he created this world, the sound world of that incredible dedication to Frodo from what's his name, the next guy,
Samwise.
Sam, yeah.
Yes.
That incredible dedication to Frodo and how that's in every part of the music. That sort of love and warmth and so you hear 1 minute of that score and you've kind of got the whole feeling of the whole cycle.
Yeah. Who the people are. Yeah, it's so true. Yeah.
Just
yeah,
wonderful achievement.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
So good, so good. Erica, you are so awesome to be here with us, and I can't thank you enough for
Great to be
help.
here.
Thank you for helping found the
Mm.
original website that we are
Mhm.
now celebrating 22 years later. I
Yeah.
can
yeah.
hardly believe it. Were we ever that young? Were we?
I don't know. Look, my son's just turned 12, and
Oh
he's
my
just,
gosh!
I
Wow.
know, and it's just sort of I was involved with the Lord of the Rings tour company. I remember sort of bounding around Edoras and all that sort of landscape while heavily pregnant with him. That was back in, yeah, back then. And now, and he's just getting old enough to realize, oh, this was kind of a big deal. Oh.
Yeah, sorry, everybody. I'm going to have to
You
go,
have
but
to
it's
go.
been a real
Yeah,
pleasure,
yeah.
and thanks for the opportunity.
Yes, we do thank you very much, David Gelling. Did I say your name wrong?
Gilling, yeah.
Gelling, David Gelling, thank you. We're going to close our show and say a proper goodbye to everyone. Also to Don Armstrong and to Jim Ware and, of course, Doug Adams, co-authors of the upcoming Music of the Hobbit trilogy book. And again, the Music of the Lord of the Rings trilogy is in its 6th printing. Erica Chalice, you are extraordinary for being here with us. And all of you, thank you for being part of musical history and cinema history. And you know what they say, movies are forever. They're always on the shelf. The movie that you worked on will always be there for generations to come. And what a remarkable blessing it has been for you to bring that music to life. And for us, the listeners, we are the great beneficiaries of your work. Thank you to everyone. And a big thank you to Justin behind the scenes for pulling all the strings to make our show work. We'll see you, faithful audience, next week, Tuesday at 5 p.m. We'll be here again live, streaming to you from my living room right here on the OneRing.net. So until next week, take good care of yourselves. This is Clifford Broadway signing off. You can follow me online at QuickBeam2000 on Twitter and Instagram. And until next week, I'd like to say good night and good luck, and also buenos noches y buena suerte. Bye, everybody. Cheers.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.